All right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's seminar. Today I'm happy to have Oleksiy Agapitov here with us, and he's going to be discussing chorus and His spatial scales in the lunar magnetosphere. Oleksiy is currently working as a research scientist at the Space Science Lab at the University of California, Berkeley, where he's been since 2013. He received his PhD in 2003 from the main astronomical observatory of Ukraine, and then worked at the National University of Kiev. He then moved to become a postdoc in France from 2009 to 2011, where he worked in the Laboratory of Physics and Chemistry, and then moved to a research position there from 2000 to 2013. After that is when he started at Berkeley. His main interests are wave-particle interactions in the plasma systems of Earth and planetary magnetospheres and the solar wind from spacecraft data and numerical models. So with that, if you'd like to take it away today.
Thank you for the introduction, Kyle. And today I will be speaking about pretty narrow and small topic in the wave-particle interaction in the Earth's magnetosphere. It is dedicated to the scales of Horus and his waves. However, there are several hints to more general problems of plasma physics, which I will notice during my talk. I want to emphasize my co-authors here who were participating and contributing to this work, because it is kind of review of several our papers here. And so Didier Morinas, Anton Artemiev, Vladimir Krasnoselskih, Lauren Bloom, Aaron Brenneman, John Ponnell, George Hospodarsky, and John Weigand. So I'll start from pretty standard picture of Earth's radiation belt, inner belt, outer radiation belt. In the outer radiation belt, we have natural electromagnetic Whistler emissions, which are Horus. These waves are pretty well known to everyone who is listening us right now, but these are Whistler waves, electromagnetic emissions, right-hand polarized, which are observed in the frequency range from about 0.1 of a local electron cyclotron frequency up to 0.9 of the local cyclotron frequency. The interesting issue for Horus is that they are very well structured emission. The example is shown in the top. So structuring of them is meaning that they are observed as separated, pretty well separated structural elements, usually rising tones, sometimes falling tones, and they are separated a little bit. Wave power is usually observed into separated frequency ranges below and above 0.5 of local electron gyro frequency. So we distinguish them as low band Horus and upper band Horus. Now to the topic of my today's talk. Multi-spacecraft missions immediately showed what such structure of Horus waves can be observed from several points with rather similar picture. Here is the example from RBSP-A and RBSP-B. They were cross spacecraft distance was about 450 kilometers here, and as you see, we clearly see very similar structure of Horus elements recorded aboard both the spacecraft. This is not, the RBSP is not the first project which actually sees this picture. First of all, some multi-point observations of Horus has been done aboard IC-1-2 spacecraft, and it is reported by Garnett in 79, when actually, but they did not have so high time resolution picture. They had only wave power, but similar picture of wave power was observed when two spacecraft were at the distance of about 600-700 kilometers. And when we have better resolution, it looks like that. These are pictures from 4 cluster spacecraft. Here, for cluster inter-spacecraft resolution across magnetic field line was about from several tens to several hundred kilometers, and this picture is kind of something what very regularly was observed when such structure of Horus elements was nicely recorded aboard of all 4 spacecraft. In the right, it is Themis, and here it is even more interesting because here Themis spacecraft were on the distance from 300 to 3000 kilometers, and it was in the outer magnetosphere. So again, very similar picture of Horus structure was observed. In the bottom here, it is distribution of correlation coefficients, and we observe significant correlation up to kind of almost 2000 kilometers, even more here because it is in Earth radius, so up to 3000 kilometers. So that means that we have, and what is most interesting, Horus generation is a nonlinear process, and if we have such localization of nonlinear process, that means a lot about plasma distribution function, how homogeneous this plasma distribution, and studying all this will can give us some knowledge about better understanding of generation processes. Also, this is important for the process of scattering and acceleration of particles. So how local is a single Horus element, because a single Horus element is supposed to be more or less coherent, so can interact non-linearly with electrons, can accelerate through the phase trapping. Phase trapping is kind of, for phase trapping, coherence of wave is kind of critical. So, and also for process of scattering of electrons and precipitation of electrons from the outer radiation belt. Now is kind of we better understand microbursts, and now we better understand, after the paper by Mike Shumko 2020, we better understand the scales of microbursts. So microbursts are pretty localized process of precipitation of relativistic electrons. That means what we probably need better connection between Horus waves, so their localization, and localization of such fast bursty scattering. That's why it attracted our interest, and actually some interest of community to this problem of localization. And I will present some results of that, what we have from actually not almost, but all multi-spacecraft missions, what we have now in the background. I'll start from some definitions, because mostly problems with and discrepancies in the result are caused by different definitions of what we have for these scales. So we have the biggest scale for Horus and His, actually, it is the scale of the active region. Active region means what in this particular region we can observe waves with similar frequency range and similar amplitude parameters. So that's just the active region where wave properties are similar simultaneously. And here I confess I start from spoilers, so I will tell with scales. For Horus waves, such scale of the active region, the region where properties are similar and waves are observed simultaneously, is about 1 Earth radius. For His, that can be up to 2 Earth radius. And then next, smaller scales are only for Horus, because His are unstructured emissions and we have only active region. For Horus, the scale of spatial extent of a single Horus element. This means the maximal distance where the same Horus element can be detected by 2 spacecraft. For Horus waves, these scales varies from 600 kilometers up to 1,000 or even 1,200 kilometers. This from measurements from cluster and Van Allen probe. The smaller scale is related to the distribution of wave power in the source. So Horus is generated not as homogeneous wave power in the entire source, but it has some distribution of wave power. And if and I will show what actually it works, we can fit this distribution by the 2-dimensional Gaussian of wave power. And correspondingly, the characteristic scale of this is the scale of decay of wave power in the source, and this scale was found to be about 150-300 kilometers. And fourth, it is a smaller scale. It is the cross scale transverse to magnetic field, when in 2 points we still obtain the coherent signal from a single Horus element. So this scale is very important for nonlinear wave particle interaction, because it determines can phase trapping work, or actually it can't, or will be broken very rapidly. And this special scale of the wave coherence is about 60-200, up to from 60 to 200 kilometers, and actually corresponds to several factors which I will mention in my talk. So here is schematically how it looks like: Horus elements propagating from the equator and some scale. This is active region, this is spatial extent, and this is coherent scale, which very schematically shows what do I mean here. This is a scale where wave captured in 2 points can be considered as coherent. Some example in the bottom, but I'll go to the next slide, which kind of presents how these scales are manifesting themselves in the data. So this is a picture of very schematic picture, sorry for that. But this is geomagnetic equator, and Horus elements are propagating from the geomagnetic equator. So active region is here, spatial extent is here, the amplitude decay scale is here, and coherence scale is here. How it looks in the data: if we are below the coherence scale, we observe actually particularly the same. And this is the general picture when we analyze multi-spacecraft data from the MMS mission. For MMS mission, scales inter-spacecraft distance is 10 kilometers, and actually we see more or less the same signal from Horus. When we are in between the amplitude distribution and spatial extent, we see very similar picture in Horus structure, but with different amplitude. And when we are exceed distance spatial extent of single Horus element, but we are still inside the active region, we see similar picture, but actually which is on time is not anymore correlated. And when we exceed that, we just observe different waves. So that's how these scales are easily seen in the data, and now how to determine them in more details. I'll start from the probably most complicated scale. It is a coherence scale, and actually it is smallest, which characterize the Horus emissions. So this is the signal from Van Allen probe. Cross spacecraft distance here was about 150 kilometers, and this is one Horus element from 2 spacecraft. And in the bottom, it is the phase picture. So here we see what we observe: similar phase shift during more than 50 periods of wave. Some mathematics must be applied here, but we can quantify such wave coherence in terms of what is the time scale for when wave can be considered as coherent. After some math, it goes to such analytical expression where T big is capital T is the time of estimation of correlation coefficient, and tau is the time when wave is coherent from 2 signals. This is how it looks for this particular interval. We see 2 groups of signal. This one is completely incoherent, independent waves which are observed here and here. And this nice group of points is fitted by this expression, which allows from this fitting to get the time scale for this coherence. And here it is about 0.1, 0.2, which corresponds to 50 periods, what are shown here. And these techniques actually allows pretty interesting thing to do, because surely starting from some assumption. If we adjust the model of wave propagation through the randomly inhomogeneous media, and if we have enough points, enough means 4, we can estimate scales for plasma density irregularity. So this is scale of plasma fluctuation cell. It is L transversal, L parallel, and the example of application of this technique to cluster data is here. This is schematically how cluster spacecraft were situated. This is the signal, and this is fit of the function what I just showed. And here we probably for the first time could estimate these scales of fluctuation cells. Transverse to magnetic field, it was found to be between 60 and 90 kilometers, and along magnetic field it is up to 1,000 kilometers. So we have almost an order for fluctuation cell, almost order longer along the magnetic field line, which is kind of natural, but it is nice to get that quantified. Also, what was interesting, the transverse fluctuation scale is nicely corresponds to the coherence scale. So probably exactly plasma inhomogeneities determine how coherent wave are, which is also natural, but kind of nicely to obtain here the direct quantification of that. And now to Van Allen probe, closer to better quality data. Van Allen probe provided all 4 components of the harmonic wave measurements, and this also what was nice. Sometimes we collected very long intervals, and we collected them continuously from 2 spacecraft in waveform with very high resolution, up to here it is 16 kilohertz. So this is an example. Here, the apogee of Van Allen probe and distance between spacecraft is shown here. It varied from 2,000 kilometers during orbit down to 100 kilometers. And these are 2 examples how Van Allen probe detected Horus waves continuously during the entire interval, and now the result. These are how it has been analyzed. The correlation coefficient was estimated based on the log of wave amplitude, just to avoid some problems with very large amplitudes. And this is the distribution of correlation coefficient from this orbit. The size of the circle corresponds to the wave amplitude here. And so we see nicely that noise-like perturbation are uncorrelated on both the spacecraft. However, when we see signal, when we see waves, they are nicely correlated at different distance, a little bit differently. So it is possible to say that the scale here is about 600 kilometers, but we see still significant correlation up to almost 1,000 kilometers between 2 spacecraft across the magnetic field. This is the second orbit with lower, not lower, but larger inter-spacecraft distance, but still we see pretty nice correlation up to 800 kilometers in between. This allowed also to process a little bit repeating of this slide, to process wave cross coherency, and here is the result of how long a wave could be considered coherent from 2 spacecraft. Here from 20 milliseconds down to several milliseconds, and the distance when actually wave was coherent enough to have some influence for nonlinear wave particle interaction. Here it is about 150 to 200 kilometers between 2 spacecraft. This is the coherence scale. Now to wave amplitude decay. Wave amplitude decay here is calculated based on the Monte Carlo model when we have Gaussian distribution of wave amplitude in the source. And this has been compared with the real distribution of wave amplitude captured on spacecraft A over spacecraft B. And here is the comparison of this distributions from spacecraft and from Monte Carlo model, which gave pretty nicely the scale of decay of wave amplitude in the source to be about 250-300 kilometers. Next slide, I'll go to a new mission. It is THEMIS, which is multi-spacecraft mission as well. However, with THEMIS, it was good and bad. THEMIS didn't collect simultaneously too much waveform data. Here is one of probably 10 or 15 examples when several spacecraft were collecting simultaneously waveforms and actually captured Horus waves. This is at larger L shell, so Horus waves here are longer, and inter-element delay is kind of about several seconds, which kind of restricted for THEMIS, so it better covers the outer magnetosphere. However, the idea here was to shift to some kind of continuous data, and THEMIS is collecting FBK filter bank data continuously. This is only wave power in several frequencies. Actually, it depends from 8 channels to 32 channels in FFF data. But the example of this data is in the middle panels here. You see what this interval and interval in the bottom actually kind of in the interval in the bottom, it is still possible to see the structure of Horus elements because it is the outer magnetosphere. They are really slower than at L shell between 4 and 6. So this can be processed, and we processed correlation between different spacecraft, and we found these distributions of correlation coefficient for Horus. This is actually, this nicely corresponds to our previous results based on the waveform processing. So here we have correlation coefficient which start to decay at around 700-800 kilometers, and still at 1000 we have a significant correlation. For His waves, such correlating region is even larger. We have still significant correlation at about 3000 kilometers, but His are. And let's confirm it by case studies by Aaron Brenneman, for example, who found that His are correlating at very large interspacecraft distance. The interesting result of this study was that when we distinguished Horus with lower and higher amplitudes, higher amplitude Horus demonstrated smaller scales for single Horus element special extent, I would tell it here. So instead of 800 kilometers for smaller amplitude waves, we found what it can be up to just 200-300 kilometers. And now I'll go to some interesting discussion, why that can be important. Here's one example. So we have really interesting phenomenon as microbursts are, and connection of microburst and Horus is discussed in a couple of papers recently published by Aaron Brenneman, Mike Shumko, Forrest Moser. Here's just one example. This is the wave power collected near the equator by Van Allen probe, B here, I guess, and this is AC6 measurements of particle of electron precipitations, electron with energy above 35 keV. Actually, it covers all energies higher, so it is really hard to distinguish how relativistic they are, but still these are microbursts. And this microburst structure, you see, so nicely corresponds to the modulation of wave activity in the outer magnetosphere. But again, that's kind of nice confirmation with these two phenomena are connected. In the bottom, it is the structure of microburst and corresponding structure of Horus. Actually, it is not one-to-one correlation, even because this is how many? It is 17-second interval, and during this 17 seconds, AC6 crossed several L shells. What I probe was at 5, so fairly speaking, the direct correspondence here is only in this point where we do not have waves at all. So, but the temporal modulation of wave activity corresponds very well to temporal modulation of microburst precipitation, which kind of confirms what wave can be connected. In the right, it is the repetition of my previous slide, where it is a distribution of wave spatial correlation scale for low and high amplitude horus, and in the bottom it is from Mike Shumko paper. It is the result which shows in black dashed line actually the spatial scale of microburst, and this spatial scale of microburst pretty nicely corresponds to the spatial scales of high amplitude horus here. Low amplitude horus much worse correspond to that. That kind of I will not discuss physics of that, because here it's necessary to include pretty physical discussion about probably ducting, some localization of hot particles, some homogeneity in these distributions, but just physically it is almost impossible to get one-to-one observation in the foot point on the ionosphere, because ionosphere spectra are going very fast. But statistically, this is nice confirmation that these two phenomena are most probably directly connected. Next, it is again Themis, and now I will discuss how we determine the active region. This is the distribution of wave power collected by two Themis spacecraft at different inter-spacecraft distance. This is between 0 and about 1,000 kilometers, and these four figures are for His waves. This is between 0.5 1 RE, this is 1 RE 1.5, and from 1.5 to RE for His waves. As you see, we definitely have pretty nice correlations up to very, very long scales between spacecraft, which determine His active region to be almost 2 Earth radii. For Horus waves, which are shown here, this correlation is lost above when the cross interspacecraft distance is more than 1 Earth radii. Statistically, it is shown here. This is correlation scale for active region of Horus and His. This is along L shell, and this is along the magnetic local time. It is shown on these plots. This is for His waves. Along magnetic local time, this interspacecraft distance where we see the same active region is about 1 MLT, 1 hour of MLT. Along radial distance, it is about and even more than 1 Earth radii, 1 L shell. For Horus waves, it is interesting. We almost do not have such correlation in the night side. However, in the day side, it is again about 1 Earth radii for azimuthal and radial direction. However, it is it is strongly biased. It is for Themis, so this works for L shell above 7. The interesting extra result from this analysis was what we found very long scale correlation. So correlation goes down when we increase interspacecraft distance, and suddenly such correlation increased again when cross interspacecraft distance was about several Earth radii. And we found what this corresponds to correlation between wave power dynamics of Horus waves in the outer radiation belt and His waves inside the plasmasphere. This is the example of correlation of Horus and His. One spacecraft was at L shell about 8, and the inner spacecraft was at L shell about 4. So we found just point-to-point correlation without no correlation in between, but corresponds to the propagation of Horus wave power along magnetic field line, reflection, and propagation into the plasmasphere. We made this processing statistically, and actually we found what, yes, we have such correlation. We have some evidence what Horus do modulate dynamics of his inside plasmasphere. However, that happens only in this limited sector. And most probably it is connected to some effects of plume or plasma pose erosion. So where we have some duct-like structure of plasma density, Horus wave can propagate up to very high latitudes and can penetrate into the plasmasphere and can be detected as his increase of wave power. But showed that actually the delay between observed Horus and observed his was about in average kind of 3-5 seconds, which corresponds to the propagation speed. And usually Horus wave observed at MLT somewhere here was observed at later MLT in the plasmasphere. That's kind of nice evidence of connection between Horus and his. Got it. Now I want to say a couple of words about the MMS. MMS is so nice multi-spacecraft mission. However, for purposes of observing Horus, it is too close. So the inter-spacecraft distance of several tens kilometers provides us rather similar picture of the structure of Horus, and which is shown here. They are coherent. So correlation coefficients are always around 0.9. So it is hard to get real scales of the process. However, sometimes interesting things can be observed here. For example, this configuration of spacecraft with MMS1 in between pair of MMS3 and 4 and MMS2 should give this very similar wave amplitude. However, this MMS1 has some depletion of wave amplitude being in the middle of the spacecraft configuration. This depletion, we found what it is directly connected to plasma density depletion, which led to some defocusing of wave power on this particular point for MMS1, which is nice, interesting, and promising from point of view of remote sensing of plasma inhomogeneities and ducting effects ASIN. So now I go to I'll say that most beautiful data set, which allowed really to proceed with scales of Horus in the statistical pattern. This is FBK filter bank data from Van Allen probes, and it was not great from point of view of spectral resolution. It has only 4 channels in frequency, 13 in the early stage of the mission, but 8 in the after 2013. The great issue with this data is that the temporal resolution of measurements is 8 measurements per second, which allowed to resolve a single Horus element structure in this filter bank data. This is the example captured from waveforms, Horus elements, very nice Horus here. Interspacecraft distance is about 400 kilometers, so we see a similar picture. And in the bottom, it is the data from filter bank data set. We see the same Horus structure, and we can proceed with that. We can get correlation coefficients nicely at different distances. In the left, it is the Van Allen probe interspacecraft distance coverage, and in this panel, it is the encounters of Van Allen probe when spacecraft were closer than 1,000 kilometers to each other. So we have very good coverage of plasmasphere and outer radiation belt outside the plasmasphere. So Horus and his can be addressed from this data nicely. The example how it looks like, it is here. The size of the circle corresponds to wave amplitude, so we see pretty nicely what we saw before. Low amplitude, so noise-like data is uncorrelated from both the spacecraft. However, we have strong correlation up to 0.9 with particular region, and which goes down when spacecraft are going to a forward distance from each other. So two results now. This is the distribution of correlation coefficient captured from many encounters of Van Allen probe A and B. This is for Horus waves. This is for low amplitude signal, so no waves. This is for waves signal. And this distribution is interesting because it is kind of very natural below 400 kilometers and above 800 kilometers. In between, we have some kind of a little bit messy. And if we analyze that from point of view how these distributions look like, so below 400 kilometers, it is a single maximum. However, in between 400 and 800 kilometers, we have two maximum distribution, which was very strange to us. And we start analyzing that. We found that Horus single element spatial extent is not homogeneous. It can be longer on azimuthal distance or along radial distance. And if we have measurements in between, so this is radial, inter-radial distance, this is azimuthal distance, and if we measure somewhere here, correlation is much smaller, which shows that the Horus source, Horus, is not like circle. It's like ellipse, which is oriented along radial or azimuthal direction. And now to statistics. Here's all cases of spacecraft approaches from Van Allen probe. We had kind of 35 good approaches when Horus elements were observed and could be distinguished nicely from the data. In the night-morning sector, we have the smallest scales of single Horus element, and we are below 500 kilometers. The largest scales of Horus elements we have in the day sector, and here's the distribution. You see what we have here, kind of up to 1,100 kilometers, and this dark red shows actually when spacecraft were in between, so not separated, not radially, neither azimuthally, but in between. And the scales here are much smaller, which is kind of statistically significant here. So, and it was possible also to get the other scales of Horus. And here's the distribution of BA magnetic field, wave magnetic field captured by spacecraft A and B. This distribution been processed, and also the Monte Carlo model was used to determine the scale. The scale of wave power decay in the source was found to be about 330 kilometers plus minus 50 kilometers, which consistent with the previous results. And this is a spatial extent of active region. Van Allen probe shown with solid line Themis results, which I discussed earlier, shown by the dashed line. So for his waves, we have very great consistency of these two data sets. For Horus, actually, it's a bit different, which is caused by the different L-shell coverage. Van Allen probe covered very well between L-shell 4 and 6, and Themis actually better covered above 6 L-shells. So we see here that at lower L-shells, on the azimuthal distance, Horus are more localized than in the outer magnetosphere. So localization here along the radial distance is about half of Earth radian. And on MLT, we have again about 1 hour for MLT. So that means what Horus active region at L-shell between 4 and 6 is more elongated along the azimuthal direction than along radial. And probably that's it. Now I go to conclusions, which nicely reproduce my slide number 2, but I'll tell that once again. The active region of Horus elements is spatial extent of active region, so the region where Horus are observed simultaneously with similar amplitude is about 0.5 of radii in radial direction and about 1 MLT in azimuthal direction. For his waves, it is about 1-2 Earth radii, so much larger. The spatial extent of a single Horus element is in between 600,000 kilometers, can be up to 1,200 kilometers. In the outer magnetosphere, it can exceed even 3,000 kilometers, but that's kind of a little bit different from Horus waves, which are interesting from point of view of wave-particle interaction. The spatial decay scale for the wave power in the source is about 300 kilometers. So Horus waves really can be represented. Horus wave power in the single Horus element source can be represented as a Gaussian distribution of wave power with variance of about 300 kilometers. And coherence, cross-coherence is significant when we make observations in 2 points which are at a distance of about 100-200 kilometers, depends on the fluctuation level of plasma density. And significant correlation of Horus and His in the afternoon sector shows what here we can have significant propagation, penetration of wave power along magnetic field lines to the plasmasphere from the outer radiation belt where Horus waves are generated. Thank you. Now I am ready for questions.
All right, thank you for a wonderful talk. We do have a couple questions from Lynn and a couple follow-up questions from myself. So Lynn is asking, the time series of the Horus waves look a lot like modulated sine waves. Have you looked at the probability of seeing a good correlation between two completely unrelated waves and whether the correlations are statistically significant?
Yes, of course. Actually, if we have just really, if we take two Horus elements, even if we are in the same series, but we are not the same, we do not see any coherence evidence from these two Horus, even if we are on the similar amplitude, similar frequency. So yes, we tried that. I do not show here this example, but it's crystal clear what if we take different waves on the similar frequency, we do not see coherence, any coherence between them. If that was the question, Lynn.
Yeah, I think that summarizes it. If not, I'll get Lynn to re-ask. In a follow-up, you showed that on the night side, the correlations were quite low. And then with the MMS results, you showed that the plasma can change the Horus wave quite a bit.
Yes.
Do you think the correlation on the night side is due, or the low correlations are possibly due to rapid changes in the plasma from like convection and subsorbent injections? Do you think that's what's driving the low correlations there?
In my head, the picture here more depend on how injection is spreaded along the radial direction. So in the night side, it is more localized, the hot particle cloud, which actually generates Horus waves. When it propagates to the day side, we have spreading along radial direction as well, and that can be why active region in the day side are significantly larger when they are in the night side. From point of view of really extent of a single Horus element, you can be right here. We have much more fluctuation of density, which determines really how homogeneous is the local hot particle distribution, which generates a single Horus element. So here I will agree, but this spreading really determines the active region of Horus, which kind of also important.
Yeah, so is it the transition from tailward propagating to azimuthal propagating kind of?
Exactly.
Then?
Exactly.
Okay.
During azimuthal propagation, during azimuthal drift of this hot cloud, it spreads a little bit radially, and we have just bigger region with hot particles.
Cool. So from a substrome point of view, my interest, do you think that is then kind of signifying what that injection region looks like and how that injection region expands then?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. We have spread of injection. Also, what is nice and what is very interesting to me is that we have spreading not only radially but also along the latitude. Because of generation of Horus, we have changing of pitch and distribution, and this cloud is very well localized in the night side, where we have very localized emission on latitude. So, but when we go to the day side, hot particles are spreading along latitude as well, along radial direction as well. So, but along latitude, that means what we have larger source. We have amplifications up to higher latitudes, which determines the distribution of Horus wave power. In the night side, it is localized near the equator. In the day side, it goes up to 30-40 degrees of latitude due to this factor as well. So that's certainly a dynamics of the injection. It determines a lot.
Yeah, very cool. So Elizaveta has a final question. I might need you to clarify this, Elizaveta. What is the position of Chorus maximum during magnetic storms? Do you mean Chorus amplitude or Chorus correlations? Can you address both?
Okay, I'll try to address the question how I understood it. If we are talking about amplitude, we have burning of some set of L shells from the night side up to kind of local MLT noon. The spread of this burning of this wave generation region depends on MLT, so it is smaller in the night side, larger in the day side. And because we have also this spread along the latitude, in the night side, maximum of Horus waves is near the equator. In the day side, the maximum is shifted from the equator up to about 10 degrees of latitude, because we have more larger interval of wave amplification in the day side. From point of view of size of single Horus element, I think everything what I told is related to substorm to storm activity, because mostly high amplitude waves we observe during active events.
Mm-hmm. All right, excellent. Well, thank you again for a really cool talk. Next week, we will not have a seminar due to Thanksgiving, but following that on November 27th, Harry Arnold will be discussing PIC simulations of overstretched ion scale current sheets in Earth's magnetotail. So I hope to see everyone again in 2 weeks' time, and thank you again, Oleksiy, for a very wonderful talk.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's my pleasure.
All right, have a wonderful week. Bye.
Bye-bye.